So this is a little follow-up video to our video about the new servo top shaft control. That video goes in depth on how this part works, how to use the teach function on the handheld pendant to set the depth of control. Watch that video, and then if you do get the HMI screen, this is a build on top of that video. Principles of the machine are still the same. Having this HMI here just gives you some additional functionality to run some programs and some semi-automatic parts. However, manual mode with this touchscreen is the same as operating with the standard servo and no touchscreen. These buttons up here are just down on the box. So when you have your machine turned on here, we're going to go enter into the machine, agree. First screen that pops up is the semi-auto screen. We're going to switch over to manual. This is where you want to start when you power your machine on. This is always where we're going to operate. This is what is exactly the same as if there's no touchscreen and you're just operating it with pendant or the foot pedal mode. Couple of differences. The only thing here is that you now have one additional function where you can control what we call burst mode, or how far down the shaft goes when you press the handheld pendant or the foot pedal. But if we just start with the standard basics, like when you have the regular handheld pendant, watch that other video, but up and down with the pendant on here in pendant mode. If I switch to 2-position foot pedal, then I can close the shaft with the foot pedal in the 2 positions, turning the rolls and closing the shaft. When I have the HMI screen, I'm almost always operating in handheld pendant mode in order to do all the setup. So in this position here, just like in the other video, we have to set our teach function. We'll bring the shaft down. You might already have a part that's finished. I set my teach function, rolls touching, that's usually my starting point. If I want to check and see what a part is formed like, I'll start there. That's my bottom position. Now that they are touching, every time I get to that spot, the shaft stops. In this manual mode, this value here, if I set this to 15, this is my burst. By pressing the handheld pendant once, click, it bursts down a certain distance. If I set this to 25, my burst now is longer, up and down. So longer travel in the burst mode. If I want to bring the shaft up or down all the way, I just hold down the handheld pendant, just like in the other standard servo machine. You hold it down, it keeps going. Now you just have control over how far that burst is. Without the HMI, it's a set value. Same other things are still the same on here, just like in the first video. Top shaft speed, this is your roll speed, forward and reverse foot pedal. If you're in 2-position foot pedal mode, you can control which position your foot pedal is. If you're in handheld pendant mode, you have forward and reverse with the pedal, with the 2 pedals. Hopefully that makes sense on how manual works. This is the place where you're going to set your bottom teach function. So when this teach is set, that's going to be done only in the manual mode. I can clear it. I can go down. I can set my bottom teach function. If this value is set to 0 on the burst mode, it's going to be set up just the same as the non-HMI screen with a set value of burst distance with the shaft. I can send the shaft to the top as well with the top shaft, or with the shaft top button. If I bring it down and I just hit shaft top, it'll go up at full speed. Now let's go over to semi-automatic mode. This is where the HMI has all the functionality for repeatable parts. The first message you'll see is this here, initialize home. It's going to bring you to a generic screen with 2 steps and 0 for distances and diameter. If I hit initialize home, it just says ready. What I need to do is a couple of things. If I have programs, this is where my program job list is. From the run screen here, you have home shaft. We have to set up a homing cycle setup. Homing cycle is when I'm running semi-automatic parts, I don't want the top shaft to open all the way to the top and have to start from there every time. It's too far down to travel when I'm using thin sheet metal. When I use a piece of sheet metal like this and I put the part in, I want the shaft to go to the top, but then I also want it to come down to a certain position right where it's touching the material and it's ready to run the next part. That's the homing cycle. So when I am finished a part, I'll take it out, the shaft goes to the top, and then when I want to bring it down to a home, let's set it to probably 80 is probably a good spot to start. So it's going to go all the way up, and then it's going to come down, and it's going to be right there ready to go where it's just more than just above the thickness of the material. That's perfect. That way when I am doing a semi-automatic part, the shaft is going to open up. I'm going to put my new part in. It's going to come down. I have the option to set a wait time for the top. If I set that to 3 seconds or 2 seconds, that's how long the shafts are going to stay fully open in order to get my next part ready, get it in place, and then it's going to close. So for different material thicknesses, you might have different homing setups that can be saved for your program. So I showed you the homing cycle setup. There's the run screen. We can get back to the main run screen, or from the homing cycle setup, we can get to the program screen. This is where I'm going to set my program. I've been making these parts manually. I know roughly that for a standard bead, I like to do it in 2 steps. It's thin sheet metal. It doesn't take a lot of steps down with the shaft in order to set the program. The step down interval, this is a value that isn't exactly related to distance, but it's something that you will get sort of used to programming based on different profiles. 0 to 30 is the range, so it might be 15 might be a good value there. My diameter is 8-inch pipe, and my wait time at the top, I actually want this to be only 1 second. That's my homing cycle. So if I am good there, now I want to go to program list. I could save a new program, and we go test. Okay. So now my test is up here. I've saved it as 2 steps. Step interval is 15, diameter is 8-inch, weight at the top 1, and my down interval for the home is 80 for the starting position. We tested that in the homing cycle screen, 80 values. It was a good starting point for this material. Now we're ready to run this program. When I hit initialize home, it's going to set up and go to the home position that you set up already. If I want to check and see, you know what, if I want to change my homing cycle, I can go to home and back to the run screen. And then it'll just ask to initialize the home each time. And now we can try running this part in semi-automatic. So I'm going to use the foot pedal. The pendant now isn't needed. If I just hit the foot pedal to the first position, it's going to start running and it's going to run my program. It's going to go down 1 step and then it's going to go down a 2nd step. On the screen you'll see that it goes and says cycle complete after you've reached your... It'll do two ways of reaching cycle complete. One, it will have gone 2 steps at this interval. This is your diameter. When you set your diameter, it knows that every time it goes around 1 diameter or just over that diameter, that's when the next step down occurs. So I was able to form a really nice bead with that part. If for some reason I wanted to say, you know what, that was too deep a bead, I want it a little bit less. I don't necessarily have to change the number of steps I have. I might change my final teach position. The final teach position, up here, this blue, is the actual finish point. If I over travel, for example, if I change my steps to 35 steps, That's way too many steps. There's not that much travel in the shaft. 2 steps was not enough. Let's say I hit 5. 5 steps, it's not going to necessarily go 5 steps if my teach position is set to a final point that I actually want to finish the part. This will just tell you how many times it spins around before the shaft says. So if I go to here again, and I run the part on this side, my teach position is ultimately what's going to stop the part. So it's going to say cycle active. Now it says last cycle, cycle complete, because I reached the teach function. My bottom position from my teach is what stopped the bead from going any further. So I formed the exact same bead with more steps down. That's good. That's a fail-safe, essentially, to not go any deeper than the desired profile. The teach function for me is what's the ultimate way of setting the exact profile that you want to repeat over and over and over, is getting that teach function to be the right position for the bottom step. That's done in the manual mode, same as we do without this HMI. The HMI just gives you the ability to control how you gradually form and get you to a spot where you can do it basically without having to use the pendant or having to control each step with the foot pedal, and it can be repeatable. If we go to the program list here, I've saved some programs. Currently I have a set of single bead rolls that come with every machine on. I've got, beading crimp, standard bead, and then I've also got my weight positions. If I want to do a production run, that's where that homing cycle setup is done. But I may switch to, my combination bead and crimp, hit load program. Now it brings it over here. It will then be able to initialize the home for this program and bring it to the home position for this program. I would switch out my tooling probably prior to switching over to this program. So when we're in here, you've got some different buttons. If I want to save something a second time, I might save this as test, 2. That saved the same exact program a second time. The previous one, I overwrote this test first line. I'll just hit delete that line. Even if I have this bead here and I want to save this one again and name it as something else, make some changes to the parameters, I can do that. If I load this program, or if I select the program test 2 and I go to program screen, from here I can change some of my values. So let's say I make this 20, 20, enter, and my homing cycle, I want this to go for some thicker material, so let's make it 70, 70, enter. If I go to the program list and I hit save, this is going to be now test 3. Made some changes. Now it shows up there as test 3. 2, 20, 8, weight at the top 1, and my down home position is 70. Test 3 overwrites test 2, so I just take test 2 and I delete line. You may or may not have a program for every single set of tooling that you have to run semi-automatic. There are some sets of tooling that are just better to be run in the manual mode, a little bit more finesse and operator control. But some of the standard, production runs that you do, standard light gauge crimping, heavy gauge crimping, a standard bead, if it's the same type of bead and the same diameter, higher production runs, this is where you'll save those programs. Load my bead program. If I switch over to manual mode, servo stops in that position. This is where now I can go back to running with the pendant. If I want to make some changes to my depth stop or teach function, this is where I would make those changes, just like in our first servo video. So anyways, that's a general overview of the HMI touchscreen, running it in semi-auto, running it in manual. If you have any questions, please call us. This is a Really helpful tool for high production facilities, running programmable parts. It is not the exact answer to running every single part automatically. We call it semi-automatic for that reason. So there's manual mode and there's semi-automatic mode for programming and running high production. Come check us out also at the trade shows. We'll have this machine with us there at AHR coming up shortly. Thanks.